Start recording there. So let's just call this bit of notes here, Chapter 1, Understanding Financial Planning Process. And I will just use this page. Have some space, but maybe I'll have some additional or different thoughts than they talked about in the book. So let's just kind of go through the book for now, which I have here. And I think a lot of you guys got access to it online yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what would you say the chapter is generally about?
It's mostly about what you think would be a good idea for financial planning, like what
Yep.
recommended
Okay.
to plan for financial, like shelter, food, and
Recommended, right? Well, we talked, yeah, food, shelter, and clothing, right? Have you heard that those are the absolute basic necessities of life, yeah? Okay. And anything beyond that is really just kind of butter, maybe, right? I know sometimes you don't think so, but and it depends on your station in life, right? You know, if you just crawled out of the woods having lived there for a year, then one thing added to food, clothing, and shelter might be a luxury, you know? So anyway, the financial planning. People can get in trouble with money, right? You've probably seen it, heard of it, right? They get in over their head, they spend too much, right? And eventually, at some point in your life, many, many, many decades from now, what are you going to want to do?
you want to retire.
Retire, right? Retire how?
By planning for a retirement plan.
I was looking for comfortably, maybe, you know, reasonably, okay? Because, you know, if you retire and you haven't saved any money or have no other investment or retirement plan, then you're kind of in trouble. I mean, there is Social Security. You've heard of that, yeah? Okay. How many of you guys think that you can live well on the Social Security checks when you get them at age 67 or so? Not too well, right? I mean, it's there, it's something. I would say basically, if you guys do see Social Security at all by the time, because the whole system's in trouble, it's kind of a decent way to kind of augment whatever other plan you have. You're familiar with inflation, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So just real quick, inflation happened, right? Things, the value of a dollar decreases, right? But there's more dollars out there. Inflation is not necessarily a bad thing as long as wages keep up with inflation, right? The cost of living will increase, but if your salaries increase, it offsets. You're okay. Right now, we're facing some massive inflation. Generally, it runs around 2 to 3% each year. Right now, it's at 7%, which is that's crazy. So what happens is, let's take a teacher, right? Probably gonna tell you, your mom, right? Maybe you have a pension from New York State, right? And you know, will retire and probably end up from that pension making about 60% of what we normally got paid, right? Which isn't too horrible, because presumably by the time you retire, you're going to have maybe your mortgage paid off, a lot of your debts paid down, and not have all that expense. And so 60% of what your normal income is kind of okay, right? So think about maybe a teacher that retired back in, say, 1990, right? And they were probably earning maybe $35,000 per year, right? And then their pension to retirement, right? Probably getting about $25,000 per year, which is fine, right? Back in the early mid-90s. What if that teacher's still alive today and they're trying to live on $25,000 a year? That's going to be pretty tight, wouldn't you think?
Yes.
Because of inflation. So what I'm getting at is, you know, Social Security, if that gets added to it, can help offset that inflation a little bit. But anyway, to plan for that retirement ultimately, and other things on the way there, you want to be thinking kind of clearly about short-term goals, intermediate goals, right, and long-term goals, and have a plan for each of them. Okay. So let's see what they talk about in here. So on page 3, yeah, they talk just general personal financial planning. Standard of living, there's some terms in here you're going to want to be familiar with. And if you look in the book, and then I know this doesn't match up exactly. We have this. So here's the basic model, right? You come up with some financial plans. We're back on page 4. And then there's some actions, right? You have basic asset decisions. You know what assets are?
Like, or
Right. House, car, things you own. Yep. Your PlayStation or whatever. Okay. Credit decisions. You know, how much do you borrow and why do you borrow money for certain things? Insurance. We're going to talk about that later. So there's all kinds of decisions here, and then you'll have some results after you make those decisions. Okay. What's standard of living? What would you guys say?
it was it probably required to live comfortably what we usually have, like what's our usual way of living.
Yeah, would you say everybody has the same standard of living, or does it vary?
Yeah.
Quite wildly, wouldn't you agree? And in fact, I wonder if this book does that. Okay. They define some of these important terms down at the bottom. It's not on this online version. See the bottom left of page 4? Okay, so they have the definition of these things, right? So what does it say for standard of living?
Necessities, comforts, and luxuries or desired by the individual. Okay.
So desired by an individual, right? So that means everyone has different desires about how they want to live, right? Some people are happy kind of living simply. It's funny, one of the wealthiest men on the planet is Warren Buffett. You ever heard of Warren Buffett? Okay, the billions upon billions upon billions in wealth. And I think he drives a Dodge, lives in a modest, like 2-story house out in Omaha, Nebraska. Doesn't dress flashy or anything like that. Really doesn't spend a whole lot of money. He could be, right? You imagine that. Imagine having his kind of money and not going out and getting real nice things. So everyone's got a different mindset, right? So if you desire a particular standard of living, right, you're going to want to plan for that. Because if you don't plan, you're going to get yourself into a little bit of trouble, and you might not be able to meet that standard, right? They also talk about, some of you may end up in this position where you're married to someone and you have 2 incomes. I'm trying to find where this is here. I went way ahead. Hang on a second, let's go back. Where was it? I wonder if this is not even matching up. Wait. Yeah, we are. So it didn't used to be, but predominantly these days, we have 2 income families. Probably, most of you guys were alive. None of you guys were alive back when it was just, basically the father going to work, earning the paycheck and all that. When I was a kid, that was kind of how it was until I think I was a teenager. My mother decided she wanted to go get a job, right? But for the most part, just my father making money. Everybody did just fine. It's harder to do these days, right? Because it seems like we have a higher standard of living now, right? And to maintain that, it's helpful to have a second income. Now, this can become an issue, right? Like the psychology of it, having the 2 incomes. You would agree that both of you are going to have to agree on what your standard of living is going to be, right? If one of them wants a Porsche, hey Casper, and you really don't want to spend the money on a Porsche, then you have some problems, okay? So having 2 incomes isn't always the panacea. It's cut out to be. And I believe they say about 75% of households are 2 income families these days, right? Now here's one small calculation that we'll work on. Average propensity to consume. Everybody get where they read about that? What is the average propensity to consume? Again, you can take a look down at the bottom corners of the pages. It might be there. Right around page 4 there, Jasper.
the percentage of each dollar of income on average, then when that a person spends for supporting needs rather than saving.
Okay.
So it's short-term spending.
Right. Well, short term, generally this, if you do the calculation for this, you probably want to do it on an annual basis because your average propensity to consume may vary, say, from week to week, right? Like 1 week you might go out and blow $500 on some stuff, and the next week not so much, right? So you want to kind of take it in more of an aggregate. Would you say that a very wealthy person and a very maybe poor person possibly have the same average propensity to consume?
No.
No? It's a percentage though, isn't it? And what do percentages do?
They vary.
Well, true, right? But why do we use percent? Why do we convert certain things to percent? Well, let me ask you this. Let's say you have a wealthy guy and he spends $10 million per year, right? And the not so wealthy guy maybe spends $10,000 per year. Why would it be helpful to convert those two to percents for actual income? To walk with the two figures.
To compare them.
To compare them, right? Percent is out of 100, right? So you could take any ratio of things, no matter how wildly they differ, and put it out of 100, and you can directly compare them, okay? So they don't put it in here, but I know they do ask about it in one of the exercises or test questions. But there's a little formula, right, as a percent, and it's not too hard. Let me go here. So your average propensity to consume right? It's just annual spending divided by annual income times 100, okay? Annual spending divided by annual income times 100, right? And that puts it into percent format. So have that little formula in your bag, right? It's not too hard. So if you do it that way, then you could take a look at someone who's very well off with someone who's not well off and directly compare their propensity to consume, okay? It's a percentage of each dollar that you earn, that you work with, okay? How do you think this propensity to consume could affect your future needs?
It will result in you having less or more money for long-term goals like retirement planning or
Long-term or even shorter intermediate term, right? Let's say that, you get your paycheck and every week, you go out and, you spend 90% of it, right? On the here and now, right? Okay, but what are you foregoing? Yeah, you're foregoing any future needs, right? And so in the book here, they talk about spending money wisely, current needs and future needs. You're going to have some current needs, and you're going to have to decide, all right, are these things I need or are they things I want? Could I do without some things? Yeah. Okay, so you got to put a lot of thought into this. Future needs are the things like, that's hard to do, right? Because when you're thinking about stuff, you're thinking about right now, I want this game or whatever it is, okay? I want this console, this big screen TV, I need it right now, right? And it's really easy to kind of push off, and not think about your future needs, right? Yeah, let's see, what else do they talk about here? Let's move on to the 11C, accumulating wealth. So we do have, that's over on page 5. And let's talk about what wealth is. because there's some misconceptions, okay? Now, the book defines wealth down there. Well, how does the book define wealth?
Total value of all items owned by the individual, such as savings, accounts, stocks, bonds,
Okay, your house, your car, right, all the stuff that you own that you could liquidate and sell and get cash for, right? Right. Now, when you hear that, because I hear things like that, you know, the wealthy people in the country, maybe they're hoarding all the money. Is wealth the same as money?
No.
Mm-mm. Let's talk about assets for a second. So, money is one type of asset. Would you guys agree?
Yeah.
All right. But property, plant, and equipment are other types of assets, right? And they are measured by this yardstick called money, cash, right? So, like, when you hear somebody say, my God, they're sitting there with billions and billions of dollars of wealth, I think a lot of people think that, okay, there's only so many dollar bills out there in circulation, and they have all of them when they see this, you know, somebody's worth $5 billion, right? And I can't get any of those dollars. Well, when you hear about those dollar figures, that's just a measurement, like inches or feet, okay? The fact that someone owns, say, a factory, and that factory has a value of $1 billion doesn't mean that they have that much cash, right? How would they get that cash?
By liquidating.
They'd have to sell it, right? So when you hear about, you know, big corporations and whatnot and what they're all worth, and, you know, you get angry because you don't have that, they are not rolling in cash. I mean, in fact, there's not enough dollar bills in circulation to liquidate all of that stuff. Does that make sense? Okay. And by the way, what are those assets doing in those businesses?
They're gaining more value.
Value added. You ever heard that term? Value added. Okay. This is that's actually what wealth is, right? Take, say, I don't know, a simple example. How about this clipboard? Right? Generally, any clipboard. Maybe it's worth, I don't know, $5 if you had to go buy one, yes? Let's think about the parts of the clipboard. There's this piece of metal here. There's this board. There's a little spring in here, right? So it looks to be about 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces all together. What if all these pieces were just separated and lying there? Would each piece individually be worth anything to you? Like if you just saw this piece of metal, you say, wow, look at it there, I just scored. Yeah, pick it up and brag your friends. No, because what does it do? If it was just separate from yourself? Nothing, right? There's no value whatsoever. Like all of these components have no value whatsoever. But then somebody, and this is kind of a rough example, came along and saw these components laying there and decided to assemble them into something useful. Well, it's the same components, right? The same pieces.
But now it gains value.
That's value added, right? Okay, he hasn't taken money from anybody, right? He's just generated more value from those pieces that had no value, right? Maybe think of a cell phone. You know, how many hundreds of tiny little parts are in there? And then separately, what would each of those parts be worth? Not much, right? But when you assemble it, right, it's actually the word is synergy, right? Have you heard that term? Synergy is when the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Right? So the value of the cell phone, when assembled, has a higher value than taking all the parts and adding up their value without being assembled. Right? So that's value added, and that's more where wealth comes from, if that makes sense. It's not just cash. Cash is really just a measuring stick. Okay? So I got off topic with what the book was doing, and time to time I will do that. There's also different types of assets that they mentioned. There's financial assets and tangible assets, two like broad categories. Financial assets would be things like what? Yep. Anything where you invest and expect some kind of return. You can't really touch it so much, right? How about your savings account at the bank? Is that an asset?
Yes.
What do you get from it?
They get money.
interest, right? Okay, it's generating its own value, right? And we could talk about why it's interest maybe a little bit later when we get into the banking thing. Yeah, so all that kind of, those are financial. Then you have, of course, the tangible assets, which you're probably more familiar with, right? Like your house, real estate. You know what real estate is?
Yeah.
Okay, or real estate or real property is what it's called. Right, that's land, buildings, that kind of thing, like immovable things, okay? Okay, so have an idea of the different type of assets that you'll be thinking about accumulating in your life, right? Because as you go along and get a little older, you start accumulating things. Like, for example, the tools that I own today. 40 years ago, I think I had a hammer. You know, and now I've got a fairly decent handy little workshop in my garage with a tool for just about anything I think of being something for some project, right? But that it gets accumulated slowly over time. Okay. Yeah, so think about what, like, the difference between wealth and cash, because I think that's an important consideration that a lot of people don't think about, right? They start to get a little bit jealous of somebody that has more wealth than them. They think that, okay, since they have that wealth, it's like they think of it as like a pie, right? Right? Like all the wealth in the country's a pie, and that's it, that's that amount, right? But we know that wealth isn't just a pie. We just talked about the clipboard. Does wealth grow and shrink? It does, right? So it's not a pie. It's not what they call a zero-sum thing, okay? It gets created. Okay, so what do we got here? What's this thing? Am I on the wrong page again? Exhibit 1.2, 11C. Okay, well, that kind of goes on to the other page. Okay, oh, and by the way, the financial assets, there's another term they don't really highlight too much. So we have financial assets, also known as earning assets. Right, because they generate wealth by just sitting there. Okay. And then tangible assets. Most of you guys right now at this point in your life have some accumulation of tangible assets, I'm sure, right? You got your phone, you got a computer, you got what's the new gaming system out these days? Xbox, whatever. Maybe I'm like behind, I don't know. Right? But those are tangible assets, and at some point, and hopefully not too long from now, you're going to want to start thinking about financial assets. Because they just sit there and they get bigger and they get bigger and they get bigger. Sometimes they get smaller, right? But then you write it out and they get bigger. Okay. So just an example, my older son, he's doing real well with this. He's 25 now, but since he was probably 18 or 19, he started investing in the stock market and whatnot. He's got a pretty easy portfolio, which is a collection of all your investments, right around $30,000, $35,000, I think, right now. So if you start young, you're going to be in pretty good shape to get near death like me. Okay. All right. What else do we have here in this book? My book. Hey, by the way, guys, as we're talking here, if you have any questions, man, just pipe up and ask, okay? Don't be afraid to ask, because I think in that way that we're going to do this course is more like just kind of a back and forth discussion about things. We use the book to guide, okay? I'll have some other ideas, and you might as well. Okay? So there's a process that the book lays out for personal financial planning. Okay? And they give it as 6 steps. Okay? So we are on page 6, okay? Which is, let's see, yeah, it's your personal financial planning process. Okay? So they say it's a systematic process that considers important elements of individuals' financial affairs and aimed at fulfilling his or her financial, blah, 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 right? Sometimes these definitions just don't land very well. What would you guys say personal financial planning is? Just in your own words.
Just my attainment just so they have to get what they want.
Right, but what do you have to think about certain things. What kind of things are you gonna wanna think about?
You want to go for both short term and long term, like you want to have buy cars and assets.
Yeah, but more generally, you're gonna wanna think about your needs, future needs, right? And when I say needs, I mean things you actually have to survive, and then wants, right? Things that you'd really like to have in place, okay? And those things aren't always the easiest to come by. And if you can get a nice systematic plan, it makes it not a certainty, but you're a lot more likely to reach these goals, right? So if you look at the top of page 7, there's a 6-step process there. Okay? And it's pretty simple, it's not complicated. Okay? So what's the first thing you want to do?
You want to define a financial goal.
Okay, and that's going to be a little different for everybody, right? Yeah. Again, you know, Warren Buffett, just for living, has some pretty basic financial goals, but for investing, pretty wild financial goals, right? So he has, like, I guess, 2 separate sets, doesn't he? And then you want to make some plans to achieve those goals, right? And after you make the plans, obviously, what are you going to do?
You gotta implement that.
Implement, right? Make them work. Yeah. Now, once you have these plans in place, is that it?
No,
What do you do then?
monitor them
For what?
to see if they change or if they actually progress to help into doing.
Yeah, you're always keeping an eye on it, making sure it's leading to what you want it to do, right? Or maybe you've changed your mind about some goal that you had, right? And so then what do? Go back, well, yeah, change your goals and go back and readjust your plan, right? To meet that. And you would do that, especially if your plan's not quite working, okay? And you also probably want to use some financial statements, okay? Which is actually getting this down on paper, statements about how much you earn and statements about how much you spend. And there's software out there that does that too. So basically, they're talking about a budget, aren't they?
Yeah.
Right? The budget could be the result of having a plan, okay? And the budget will include income and all your expenditures, you know, hopefully separated out. And then the last step is just redefine your goals and go back and fix your plans, right? You're thinking about what you want, making a plan, putting the plan to work, evaluating, and going back. Basically, it's a circular loop, right? Going back and redefining your plan. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay. What is money?
It's how much you have. It's like one.
We'll say you don't have any. What is money?
Money is like currency.
Yeah. It's a medium of exchange, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's the way we've decided, right, to give people things and have them. So you give people money and they give you things, don't they?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody know how we establish the value of a dollar? Or does that just kind of happen?
By the government.
So some governments do that, right? Especially say like the Chinese government, right? They have strict control over the value of their currency, and they can change it at a whim, right? The fiat currency is called, right? But ours is more based on the account. We used to be on the gold standard. We can get into that whole discussion another time. That actually might be something good for you guys to look up at some point. The gold standard from where we are now. We went off the gold standard back when Nixon was president. Now we kind of let our Federal Reserve can't really set the value of the currency, but they can adjust certain interest rates, basic interest rates, to help the currency from inflating too much or deflating too fast, keeping wild swings out of it, right? But it's basically a measurement tool. It's like a yardstick, isn't it? Again, you know, somebody has the wealth, $5 billion in wealth. Well, that $5 billion just comes from the tape measure you measure with wealth, right? So that's one way to think of what dollars are, okay? Utility. What is utility? Lower right-hand corner of the page.
Basically, how much satisfaction you get from what you pay for.
Right. The usefulness of something, yeah? Have you ever purchased anything and decided this is not all it's cracked up to be?
Yeah.
So its utility to you, right, personally, wasn't that great. You thought it might be because maybe that item had more utility to somebody else, yeah? Right? So that varies wildly between people, okay? The amount of satisfaction you get from some good or service, okay? And that utility, right, your perceived utility or satisfaction, will that define how much you're willing to pay for it?
Yeah.
Right? Something has higher utility, would it be more desirable to you? I would say yes, and you would be willing to do what?
Pay more.
Pay more for it, right? Okay. So again, for the parts of this clipboard, when they were all separate, how much utility did they have?
Zero.
None. Now, they have some utility, right? I can use this. How far did you guys read into the chapter, would you say? Page 9?
Yeah.
That sound? Okay. I thought you'd get a little bit farther.
I got the end of 1, 2.
So section 1, 2,
Yeah, I got
D or E or
there's a
something
lot
like
there.
that. Okay. Let's see here. How about on page 8, the psychology of money? Did you read a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Okay. And that has a lot to do with your personal value system, right? So here's a term. Hierarchy of values. What a hierarchy is?
That means like a way.
Different levels of things, right? Like probably the most important thing in a hierarchy would be at the top, yeah? Yeah, and less important things or supporting things would be at the bottom. So somebody's hierarchy of values may have things at the top like, I've just got to get my kids set and ready for life. They sacrifice everything, all their financial, work into that, right? Somebody else's hierarchy of values might say, okay, kids are going to earn their own way, and I'm going to spend my money on everything that I want, right? So everyone's got a little different hierarchy of values. And money kind of plays into that psychology, right? You got a family life to talk about. You want a job. So let's say you have a family, and this goes back, when I first got out of college for my undergraduate finance, one of the jobs I looked into was as a stockbroker or financial advisor, right? As I looked more and more into it, and I had a family, had one kid at the time, he was really young. My oldest son was 25. The amount of hours they have to put in that job, it's probably, 50, 60 hours per week. Actually, at the office, but then in all of your free time, you're also working on networking, right? Always talking to people about, deals and such, right? Even at the Little League game, okay? And my hierarchy of values told me that I don't really, I want to be around for my son a little bit, right? Even though the money could have been a whole lot more, I could have, stockbrokers, if they're pretty good, can make upwards of $200,000, $1 million a year, that kind of thing. They're in the right market, in the right town, okay? But I decided, I don't do that, so I ended up getting a job as a banker. Banker's hours, you've heard people make fun of those, right? It's a standard, 9 to 4:30 kind of thing. But then I got even better hours as a teacher, I guess, so keep going down that rabbit hole. A little bit for you see, your mom works at home, right? She put together her curriculum at home. Okay, so those more hours, right? Okay. So I know I did. Where are we going? So yeah, my hierarchy of values changed, right? I decided not to go into that field, right? Somebody else might, especially if you were single, you know, making the top amount of money possible is going to be higher in your hierarchy, right? You said you got roughly like page 9 or 10 or something.
Yeah, to 11.
Yeah. Let's talk about the money and relationships. Anybody here, and I don't want you to give me any torrid details, your parents get into a debate about money and finances? Have you? Right? And maybe sometimes it can get pretty animating, maybe, right? If you're not on the same page, okay? So not just your spouse, but friends as well. I will say this. This is kind of a good rule to live by. Money can come in between people very, very easily. It's not a good idea to, say, loan your friends money or borrow money from your friends. Why would that be?
Because you're bringing like much less on you, but
Money's important to people, right? Isn't it?
yeah.
And let's say you borrow money. Let's say I borrow money from you, Antonio. You spotted me $50, right? I'm going to borrow 50 from you. I'll pay you back next week, right? And you and I have a pretty good relationship right now. But next week comes and goes, and I haven't paid you back. And you're sitting there thinking, what, should I say something to him? Should I not? Do I want to ruin the relationship by saying, hey, give me my $50, you bum? All right? And I'm still not paying you, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't have $50, right? And he's going to be mad at me, right? So can you see the conflict that can happen there? And a lot of times people can lose friends and even close family members because of situations like that. So keep that in mind. Okay? Let's see here. That's page 9. Let's at least get into the long-term, short-term goals and things like that. Okay? Around like page 10. And I believe they have a worksheet. Did I hand you guys that worksheet 1.1 yesterday?
No.
Okay, we gotta put some of that out, because that's gonna be, so for probably problem number 2. I did put it in the Teams though.
Yeah.
But I'll give you a hard copy. So that one exercise number 2, actually use that. So over on page 10, they talk about goals, okay, and putting target dates on financial goals. So by target dates, I mean, they can be a little bit fungible, but your short-term goals from your reading, what time frame are they talking about there, short-term?
Mostly like days, weeks, or an hour.
I think is it 6 months to a year, something like that. Not too far out in the future, right? So like over on page 11 there, short-term goals, usually about a 12-month period. Okay, intermediate goals be a little bit longer, right? How long would you say the intermediate goals would be? Well, first, maybe it's easier to think about your long-term goals. How far out would your long-term goal be?
40 years.
Yeah, right? Right, so the short term are like out to a year, right? And that's kind of the steps you'll have in place to achieve the intermediate goals, which might be out like 5 to 10 years, right? And then those goals are kind of in place to help you, scaffold up your long-term goals, okay? And so ideally, when you're making this plan, you probably want to think first about the long-term goals, right? Does that make sense? And then you can work backwards from there and start thinking about, okay, what are the intermediate goals I need to achieve that? And now what are the short-term goals I need to get the intermediate, right? So it all kind of, it flows down, it kind of flows back up, I guess, right? There's a section on page 11, okay? You see where it says do it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Read that over there. See if I can find it up here. Anybody heard of Yogi Berra?
No.
famous Yankees catcher back in the 40s. To be really? Yikes. Okay, I guess I'm getting old. You see the I think it's in here. There it is. This looks a little different than what's in here. Okay. He's got a lot of cool little sayings. What he says, you don't know where you're going, it might not get there. He also said things like, you see a fork in the road, take it. Whatever the hell that means, right? You can probably imagine. But read this over here. You got a piece of paper, right? I know you guys haven't put a lot of thought into this, but start thinking right now some of your financial goals, at least short term. And go ahead and jot them down. Take a few minutes. Let's see what you guys come up with. Maybe you want to share some of their maybe their short-term goals with us. Ryan, you got any?
Save money for college.
Save money for college? Okay. Would that be, as a goal though, would that be more short-term or intermediate? Like an intermediate, right? Because you're a junior now, right? So it's a couple of years out, yeah. But the saving money, right? So that, okay, so I think that's an intermediate goal, right? But what would be the short-term goal to scaffold that? So it sounds like your goal is to have money for college at that time, right? So what kind of short-term goal could make that happen? Like in the next 6 months to a year?
And
Okay, there's something. There's, right, there's a simple idea. Anybody else have any thoughts? Start making money, get a job, right? Right? What else would you think would scaffold his goal, his intermediate goal, to have money for college in a couple of years? What's that? Well, that's a different thing, I think, right? He's talking about having money for college, which is like whichever college it would be, right? Okay. Because that's probably a different intermediate goal, right? And then you have some other short-term goals to help with that. So you got a job, right?
selling assets.
Okay. You have some assets you can sell, Ryan? Not really. Maybe. Probably don't want to part with them. You probably want to take those assets to college with you, have them in the dorm. Yeah. Okay. Casper.
Actually begin putting aside money.
Okay, there's a short-term goal. Get more specific though, right? Think about what? Okay, put aside money. That's kind of general. Would you want to get more specific than just put aside money?
So a saving account.
Well, that's what he was saying. Yep. Right. So you have a job. You make a certain amount of money each week. Get more specific than just put aside money for the goal, like a real actual goal. Okay, yeah, that's a separate short-term goal, right? We can come back to that in a second. I like that one. Yeah.
So like saving $25 every single time you get paid.
Okay, there's where I'm getting at, right? So good, but a little ambiguous, right? Be specific about it, right? How much do you want to set aside and how often do you want to set it aside, right? A percentage, right? But let's say that your intermediate goal, you know exactly how much you want to save for college, right? Maybe you want to have, I don't know, $10,000 saved up. Is that going to affect your actual specifics of your short-term goal, right? That'll affect the percentage and the frequency, wouldn't it? See what I'm getting at? Like when you get to the short-term goals, they're going to be a lot more specific and detailed, I would say, than the intermediate and long-term. That makes sense? Okay. You said scholarships, okay, and then other stuff. Well, so I guess that could kind of be a short-term goal, but there would be some other goals to maybe achieve getting a scholarship. And what little goals would you have in mind to achieve a scholarship? What gets you scholarships? I mean, if you're going to get something, you need to know how to get it, right? And there's a short-term goal.
Being good academically.
Okay, yeah, right. Writing an essay? Uh-huh.
Applying for a lot of stuff.
There's a very short-term goal for that scholarship plan, right? Get the applications filled out, first of all, right? But what, again, then what are you gonna put on the application? You said something about your transcripts, right? Which need to look what?
Academic
Really good, right? And so how do you get your grades to look good? We're coming right down to really super short term.
You financially plan.
Well, now how do you get your grades to look good, to go on the scholarship application to get the scholarship? You do, okay, that's exactly right, but get more specific, right? Take a class. What do you have to do in a particular class to get an A?
Spend money to get supplies.
I need a 93 on this next test, right? If I don't get a 93, I'm only going to get a B- in this class. See what I mean? And you want to have A's on the transcript, right? So more specific short-term goals. So start thinking more specifically as you're putting this together, right? Kind of work backwards and say, all right, these short terms, I need this much money, so I'm going to either need a job or a scholarship or both, right? And get specific about how are you going to get the job?
You have to have a good. You have to have a good working portfolio, or
I don't know how much of a portfolio you guys have. Resume, huh?
You might need experience for a job.
Experience, but
Might
number
have.
one, get some applications out there.
I
Have a pre-existing connection.
Networking.
network.
Okay, we're off goals a little bit now, but networking, I was going to bring that up later. That is a really important thing, especially when trying to find employment, especially a little later when you're looking for a career, right? You get to know people. Maybe, you know, you work for someone sweeping floors that owns a business, right? And it's pretty, I don't know, like State Line, right? Maybe a, you know, detailed cars or something there, right? But you got to know Jeff a little bit, right? And then later on, when you got some experience, you got a college degree. Maybe I'm more useful to Jeff now than sweeping floors. So maybe he'll hire you. But if he doesn't, I guarantee you, he knows probably 50 other people that could use the skill set you now have, right? So you network, right? You know, one person, and they can put you on to several other people. So networking is key, okay? So you kind of get the idea about the details of the goals you're trying to set, right? And there's where you can go back and readjust, right? So now you say, okay, I'm setting aside 40% of my paycheck, right, to get that money. And maybe as the months go on, you're not getting as many hours, your paychecks are getting smaller, right? Now you have something to adjust. You have a percentage to adjust, go back and adjust. Does that make sense? And now you say, okay, maybe I have to start sticking away 60%, which means then you're going to have to do what?
Adjust your financial.
Yeah, do without certain other things, right, to actually meet that intermediate goal. Does that make sense? Okay, so have specific things, especially in your short-term goals, that can actually be readjusted, right? Because like when you guys first started, you said that the short-term goal is to put aside money. Well, how do you readjust that? There's nothing. There's no measurement by what it's to readjust. Does that make sense?
You basically say that I save up to $200,000.
Yeah. Have a specific number in mind that makes sense. Then you have something you can go back and readjust. And it looks like maybe it's not kind of panning out, that kind of thing. Okay? Time this class over again?
9:34.
35? 34, whatever it is. Okay. All right. Why don't we bag it there for now? And so maybe now you have some things to think about when you're doing a couple of those exercises, right? And remember, you know, start on those, you know, now. That way you don't have to do, I think there's 10 of them, right? I don't know how long they are, a little bit of writing or something, but, right? We get the first few done today, tonight, that kind of thing. We'll talk more tomorrow about chapter 1, okay?